everybody. So last year, the University Library set out to digitise our beautiful manuscript scroll of the Mahābhārata. I probably pronounced it much wrong, I'm afraid. And this 1795 copy of an ancient epic. Is that better? Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Ancient epic contains a staggering 200,000 verses. I'll discuss the methodology for the photography and the processing before I hand over to my colleague here, Scott Renton, who will tell you a little bit more about the online delivery. As one of the top items in our collection, it was marked as a digitisation priority. And so when a customer requested 78 miniatures, it seemed like a really good opportunity to digitise it in its entirety. There was just one problem, and that was that it was set to go on display in our summer exhibition last year. So that opened at the library in July, and that really only left us with a narrow window of opportunity for the first stages of the project, the conservation and the photography. At only 13.5 centimetres wide, but an overwhelming 72 metres long, the scroll is elaborately decorated in gold. It's got dense, tiny text, and as you can see, it is housed in a wooden case which is wound around rollers by the key on the side. This unusual original is difficult to access in its original format due to fragility. So we knew that there were a couple of minor tears that would need to be repaired before digitisation, and our wonderful conservator, Emily Hick, felt that this small job could be easily accommodated. However, it soon became apparent that the job was considerably more substantial than first anticipated. The wooden housing was actually causing the scroll to sort of fray and snag. So we had a platform built, you can see that was inserted underneath the scroll that allowed Emily to work on the edges. And this was also used again during the photography so that we could keep the scroll flat. But it took a full month of conservation work before it was ready for digitisation. And it really emphasised the need for us to have a digital surrogate that could be more easily accessed. But by early June, photography was underway, and an original like this requires a certain amount of problem solving. Despite the wooden housing, there was a certain amount of lateral movement, around about 1 centimetre from side to side. Also, as you wound it on, it would flex and ripple. As soon as you release the tension on the winding mechanism, it would also sometimes slip backwards. So we had to be able to try and keep it very still. We couldn't put anything on the surface because of the fragility of it. So we had to rule out glass. Also, the extensive gold is part of what makes this original so special. But photographically, it adds further layers of complexity. Gold illuminations can be really hard to light. If you light it from the side, it barely looks like gold, whereas if you light it from the top, you risk vast areas of specular burnout. Furthermore, as the scroll was wound, the ripple effect would cause the light to reflect at different angles, and that made the processing that little bit more complicated. We wanted a digital surrogate that would appear as one continuous high-quality image, rather than as a series of photographs. But assuming that it was possible to successfully stitch together hundreds of images, it would make for an unimaginable file size, and how would we be able to deliver this in a useful, readable format? I initially looked at some software to help with automating the stitching process, but I found that the dense text and the ripples and different reflections all combined to confuse the algorithms of the software. And whenever you zoomed in, the stitch was just really obvious, so I found it was easier to work manually. For delivery, Scott and I started doing some research and discovered that developments in IIIF would allow for scroll delivery, using a tiling system similar to how Google Earth works. So by tiling the images, we could enable a virtual reconstruction of the scroll. So my aim was to provide Scott with tiles that would seamlessly sit together, while also keeping the scroll straight. And to do this, I needed to stitch together each section of the scroll and then cut them up again. The stitching was undoubtedly the slow part, but most of the time it was a simple case of lining up the two images and then erasing the bottom edge of the top image through to see them on below. We have a colleague called Mike Bennett who thinks he can develop some software for us to improve the stitching automated. We still have some more scrolls in our collection, so we are going to investigate this possibility in the future. After the first section of the scroll was done, Scott put it up as a test version in the Universal Viewer, and we asked our colleagues if they could see any errors. My boss came back to me with a screen grab of an obvious stitch. However, on closer inspection, it turned out to be the point at which the original makers of the scroll had added in a new section of silk. So my digital stitches remained undetected. Just before I hand over to Scott, I'd just like to draw your attention to, we have a wee video there in which Dr. Naomi Appleton, our senior lecturer in Asian Studies, she speaks about the scroll and the digital surrogate, and Emily also talks about the conservation work that she did on the scroll. The blog post below is a lot more about the photography aspects of the job. So Scott's going to show you how we've employed innovative technology to enable access for modern audiences to this really ancient story. But I'd just like to finish, this is one of my favourite images from the scroll. I just think Lord Krishna's slippers are fantastic. Anyway, I'll hand over to Scott.
Okay, it's quite appropriate that me and Susan are doing this as a tag team, because that's kind of how we work. She does all the beautiful stuff with the images, the painstaking hard work on that, and then I come and do some rather prosaic stuff on servers and get the stuff out of them. So it's been made very much easier by the use of the framework called the International Image Interoperability Framework, or IIIF, which some of you may be aware of. This is something that Edinburgh have adopted with great enthusiasm recently, and I'd just like to give you a little bit of context as to what it is before we go back to the school. Basically, it's not so much a tool as a set of standards about image consumption and delivery, and it's offering great possibilities in terms of things like embedded zoom, comparison, and exposing various different versions of images. And it is trying to get to a place where images are de-siloed, they're better for sharing, and they effectively have one unambiguous home, which doesn't require duplication. You just go and visit it at its house, refer to it, and then you can leave again. So IIIF works off two APIs, which there are more, but these ones we're interested in. The image API has two aspects to it. One is a set of instructions which every image carries about with it, which tells how it should be tiled, scaled, and which formats are available. And you can also manipulate the image through the URL for your own needs. So it's kind of photoshopping without actually having to pay for the application, and doing it on the fly. So using the image API through a URL, you're capable of cropping, resizing, mirroring, and rotating the image. We've applied this to a number of our sites. We actually built, and Julie guys have their own, the St Cecilia's refurbishment website was largely driven by IIIF, and it's generally been a case of dropping images from our repository into object-driven collections websites using PC dragging, which has saved us a lot of effort in terms of clicking into other systems and having to duplicate and carry out derivative JPEGs. The second aspect of this is the presentation API, which is much more of a subjective curatorial kind of thing, and is very important where the scroll comes in. Basically, this has the concept of canvases and images being annotations, and it's how you group your images and how you want to display sort of collections of items can all be captured through the set of instructions which is called the FFF manifest. And this can be dropped into more powerful viewers such as the Welcome's Universal Viewer or Mirador, which is so we will talk more about this, because it's quite crucial to scroll up. But a couple of examples of things that we've done with the presentation API. On our art collection site at Edinburgh, we offer basically all of the images associated with an object in one handy package. And also for something like your calendars collection, that's got 10 years worth of calendars presented up into a viewer, which you can navigate like this. So before I move back to the scroll, I just want to mention a quick plug. We at Edinburgh are hosting the IIIF Committee's fall meeting from December the 3rd to the 6th, jointly with the National Library of Scotland. And this is the second biggest event in the IIIF international calendar. There's a showcase day at the start and then user groups thereafter. And if anybody would be interested in coming along for that, I'd be delighted to see you. Please just give me a shout after this. The community is burgeoning and growing, and it's massively cultural heritage. You can see that amidst all the technology and the things it's doing with AV and 3D and so on, there are groups for manuscripts, museums and archives as well, so it really touches every aspect of modern heritage. So to the scroll itself, to get these images available, we basically did some working stuff with our image repository, which is provided by Luna Imaging from California, which became IIIF compliant a couple of years ago. This is quite straightforward. You just load a lot of TIFFs and make it turn into high-res JPEG 2000, which is how the system works. We started off with 380 of Susan's sections. We realised that the performance levels, the amount of input and output that was going to be required was going to be massive, so we clumped them together and got it down to 41 to try and improve performance. So that was just making it available. In terms of the manifest, it was just a case of writing a Python script to interrogate the Luna repository and then pull together a 41 canvas manifest using two crucially important arguments. One is called viewing direction, which tells you want to show the thing from top to bottom. The other one is viewing hint, which is set to continuous, and that says you won't get any gaps between the images. And the universal viewer is very, very good for actually understanding this sort of thing, so that works surprisingly well. Okay, this is the bit that I'm slightly worried about, but we'll give it in terms of it's coming faster. Okay, but sorry folks, bear with us.
It's showing the screen.
Just give you a bit of background. It's 1.6 million. Thank you very much. It's 1.6 million pixels long and 3,000 pixels wide, which means that with a little bit more white space at the side, we would be in a position to actually offer a pixel for every man, woman and child on the planet. You can see that basically it is done the high-res does come through and it performs very, very well. The eagle-eyed Susan assures me that this actually zooms in at a factor too far, and therefore it softens more than it actually should. But as far as I'm concerned, it's slow breaking. And this applies to the text as much as the images. If you know your Sanskrit, then it's important. You'll see on the side there's a very, very narrow preview, and this is all down to scale. In fact, we had huge performance problems, and out at the IIIF community conference in Washington at some of the Smithsonian institutions this year, we actually worked with, I'll just very quickly finish this, with the guys at Luna to work on some of the bugs there with the scaling factors to get that down so that we perform as fast as we wanted. The next things we're moving on to are things like translation and transcription, and on from there. Now I do have some links to show. I'm not sure if we'll get back into them at the moment, but sorry. It's basically just to say that you can see that online at our collections.ed site. Apart from that, as I say, we are hosting the showcase event December 36th, so if anybody would like to go on, thank you very much.